Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to GovComms, the podcast that examines the practice of content communication in government and the public sector. My name's David Pembroke, and thank you for joining me once again today. Today, I am joined by a colleague, someone who has recently joined us here at Content Group to help you, government and public sector communicators around the world, to improve your storytelling. Michelle DUNNEBREEN graduated from Trinity College at the University of Dublin in Ireland in 1991 with an honours degree in Sociology and German before she trained as a journalist. She then worked for newspapers and magazines, both in the political and lifestyle areas, for more than 20 years, both in Ireland, in London, and then in Australia. Her most recent position has been at the Canberra Times as the editor of the Saturday edition's news review and analysis section. Michelle later moved into academia, joining the Faculty of Arts and Design at the University of Canberra as a teaching fellow in journalism and communication back in 2011. Here, her role was really to educate the students on political and strategic communication, and she received a communications doctorate in 2015 for her research into the Australian media's representation of Indigenous opposition to the Northern Territory emergency response in Australia back in 2007, which is also known more colloquially as just the intervention. Michelle then worked as the University of Canberra's News and Media Research Centre, specialising in media representation of marginalised groups, and following this she worked as an external affairs and media advisor to Amnesty International in Australia. She has worked most recently as capacity building outreach advisor to the Australia Centre for International Agriculture Research, which is a small government agency under the Australian Aid umbrella. And she has now brought those many, many talents and significant experience to here at Content Group, and we are so delighted that she is here to help us, to help you. Michelle, welcome to GovComms.
Great to be here, David, and great to be here at Content Group.
That's good. Well, I'm pleased. No, it's great. You've almost got the perfect background to deal with this sort of change and transition that's moving. You know, government communication traditionally has been about how do we go and buy a whole heap of television advertising? How do we go and buy radio advertising? Now, and there is still a place for that, don't get me wrong, but we're really shifting into the content communication, as we call it, or content marketing age, which really is about storytelling, journalism, and those sorts of skills. So if you're a government communicator and you are looking to understand about, okay, well, if that's what I've got to do, what's the makeup of a good journalist? What makes a good journalist?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because when I worked as a journalist, people would talk about it like it was some kind of mystique. You know, you'd have a nose for news, that you had some kind of innate ability to, spot a story. But then when I went to academia, I realised there's been a lot of research around this, around what makes a good story. And people can learn that, So this nose for news is basically about realising what makes a good story and what might turn an event into a story. Like, we have events every day, but they're not all great stories.
Yeah.
So, for example, what point does an event become news? Like, what point do you begin to tell a story? The qualities that you need are basically curiosity, wide reading, compassion, cynicism, I think, is a bit of a killer for finding good stories, because if you think you know everything, you miss a lot. If you think that some people are more worthy of listening to than others, you can miss a lot. A really important skill for journalists and content creators is listening, deep listening, and like I said, curiosity, asking questions and asking follow-up questions and listening to the answers. You know, if you're you're asking someone a question, a killer for an interviewer, for example, and also for a content creator, is if you ask a question and you don't listen to the answer, because you miss the gold.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, because it sort of develops on a theme that has come out of so many interviews over the last probably 12 months of doing GovComms, which is this notion of the role of the communicator being the glue, being the person who's getting up from behind their desk and going and finding those stories. And it's interesting you mentioned there that, you know, the empathy and humility and being able to go and ask and understand, and to be able to be vulnerable enough to ask the questions, to build that confidence where people will tell you what's going on. Because I look at government departments and all I see is an Aladdin's cave of great stories, because you know, 99.9% of what government does is they're trying to do good things. You know, no one's trying to not do a good job, or no one's not trying to, to improve in Australia's case, or in the ACT government, or any government around the world, to improve their communities and improve the well-being of citizens. So in terms of those actual skills, though, so listening's one thing, but how do I then develop that nose to know that actually I'm onto a story here? I've got something that is going to be worthwhile, that the audience is going to be interested in?
Well, going back to what you're talking about there about in government departments and being a labyrinth of stories, and there's so many stories that aren't coming out.
Yeah.
What's really key is to have communication strategies, so that you know your channels, you know your audience, you know what kind of stories that are within your organisation that you can find.
And I tend to agree with that as well, because I think that's key, and that's a very good insight, because so often, people will say, well, we're going to do a website, we're going to do an app, we're going to do a video, we're going to do... And then if you ask the very simple question of, well, why are you doing that? There's not often, that strong strategic rationale that's sitting behind it. And that's really the point, and certainly the point of the framework that we've developed with the Australian National University, which is really about forcing people to address topics strategically, and so as that they're understanding, well, what are the objectives? What is the organisation trying to achieve in terms of its policy, its program, its service, or its regulation? And then how can you as a communicator be an enabler? Where are those stories that are going to help you to bring those to life in such a way that those audiences will then respond and act and change and move in a way that is going to help you to try to achieve that end objective that you're looking for? Yeah.
Like you're saying, there's loads of stories out there, but you need to find a way to tell them in a compelling way. Whether that's, writing, you need to be able to, writing isn't something that necessarily comes naturally. So writing, rewriting, editing, and learning from your editor. Finding the imagery that goes with it, that tells the story in the way that you want to.
Yeah. But I think that's great advice. So in terms of that writing, getting the writing right. I remember years ago, there's a very famous journalist up in Parliament House when I was a young journalist, and his name was Peter Bowers. His son is a mate of mine, Michael Bowers, fantastic photographer for The Guardian up in Parliament House. And I remember saying to Peter Bowers one day, what's the secret? Because I used to love reading his stuff because it was just so rich in humanity. He really got people, and when he wrote about issues, he really got to that essence of the people. And you couldn't if you started reading a Peter Bowers story, you couldn't put it down. Because it was always, it had twists and turns, and you could see the people and you felt that you were part of it. But that's not that easy to do. But I did ask him one day, I said, well, so what's the secrets? And he said, well, there's 6 things. You got to read, and then you've got to write, and write. So to you, is it that simple? Is that the way to improve the way that you can write?
Well, absolutely, because for example, the selection of which words you use is crucial to being able to tell the story in the way that you really want to tell it. Like, for example, in news writing, we always say a source said, so-and-so said, so-and-so said. But in feature writing, for example, last time I looked, and I used this in a lecture before, there were 91 different words in the English language to describe the word said. And they all have a different meaning, you know.
Yeah.
So and they all frame the story help frame the story in a different way. And they can position the actors in the story, the sources in the story in different ways. So, writing, you just have to really, like, every single word counts, you know, when you're telling a story. And never more so, say, in social media, when you're creating content for social. You know, you only have a small number of words and, you know, pick them wisely.
But how do you get better? Is it just that matter that you really just have to practice?
Yeah.
It's as simple as that, you've really got to get to the essence of it, to know the topic, know the subject, know people, and just get going.
Yeah.
And how important, you mentioned the role there of the editor.
Absolutely.
You know, what's the role of the editor for you?
Well, the role, I've learned a lot from editors over the years. And if you're willing to take their expertise, their suggestions for how you can improve your writing, that's one of the best ways to learn. So the editor would, pick up all kinds of things, you know, like from the way the story, you know, from the way the story is framed, for example, like, you know, whether the lead has been buried down in paragraph 3 or whether, you know.
Guilty, I've been guilty of that.
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes, isn't it, when you get a little bit close, and that value is in someone being able to say, well, hang on, I'm looking at it from a little higher point, and I just can't see the...
Yeah, and I actually think your story is this, not the way
right.
or your story should start at this point, not... You know, if you get up in the morning and you walk down the street to go to the newsagents and you see, and because your car has a flat tire, but you see a clown on the side of the road crying, the story isn't about your flat tire. The story is about why is he there and what's he crying about.
And this again, but that's another great point, isn't it? Is because it's the emotional. Where's the emotion in a incident, in an environment? Because that story you just told there, it's, as you say, it's the clown. And why is he crying?
You start with the clown.
And you start with the clown.
Or you could have if you want to build tension, you might have it as a delayed intro, you know, to the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of then writing for government, because this is, again, another, you know, bugbear of mine where it's, you know, there's style guides and there are other things put in place. And often, you know, they're a blunt instrument to sort of belt the life out of, you know, any sort of creativity or imagination or prose. Yeah, what's your view around that? You know, sort of that blockish, hard, I don't know, sterile way of writing stuff. And, that's the way we have to do it.
Well, I think style guides definitely have their place. You know, like you want consistency in how you present things to the public. Like every media outlet and every department or whatever would have their own style guide, or the government would have its own style guide, so that the consumer isn't picking up one story and it's something spelt one way or something spelt differently in another. You know, it just becomes jarring for the reader. You want to have that consistency. You want to have that trust.
Yes.
The reader wants to. But then when I mentioned editors earlier, editors are great, but editing by committee is the killer.
Yeah.
You know, like I think in government communication and in other places as well, sometimes there are way too many layers of checking. You know, and the creativity can be edited out of something. The emotion or the story can be just, you know, killed by too many cooks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But how do you get a... Because, you know, and again, I think I can probably hear people listening going, yeah, that happens to me all the time. You know, I put something forward and then, you know, people want to touch it on their way through. And, you know, there's, you know, particularly external communication, it's identified with risk, and we don't want the minister to be seen badly. And and because everyone can read and write, they feel like that they know something about it. So what advice do you have for people to try to smooth the path so as that people don't feel they have a need to, you know, jump on every piece of, you know, copy that you put together?
Well, I'd say at the beginning, like even before you write, have a risk kind of mitigation strategy in place, or a risk matrix, you know, or a production process is really important, you know, about who is involved in the production from the beginning to the end, from the writer to who checks it to who signs it off, and not involve anybody else in that. Okay. But the most important thing is knowing what your risks are, you know, and preparing for them.
And again, that's the thing, isn't it? Because not everything is risky. Some things, might be, if it's a ministerial announcement about a huge new project which is addressing a very big, pertinent issue. Say for in Australia at the moment, around the drought. Australia is in a grip of a probably perhaps one of the worst droughts the country's ever seen. The government's very sensitive at the moment about that and trying to find solutions to it. So, content that's going out as it relates to those sharper ends. But there's so much content that really doesn't need that much supervision, isn't there?
Yeah, so it'll be about managers, I guess, trusting their staff. Well, first of all, recruiting the right people, but so that they can trust them. Yeah. But then trusting your staff to do a good job.
Well, I think your great insight there, though, is then once you're in that position, is then build the process and get all the stakeholders to agree. Look, this is our line. Yep. Okay, this is how we're going to create content. These are the steps that we're going to go through. If it's this type of content, okay, it might need a little bit extra, but by and large, this is what we're doing. And if you have that in place and you build confidence through that process, maybe things can accelerate. Because there's no question one of the greatest issues for any government communicator working anywhere in the world is the dreaded approvals processes.
Right,
That's just, people look at that and it kills people. Mm-hmm. It sucks the life out of them. And when you talk to them, their heads go down and it's like, they're trying, but they're getting killed by it. But perhaps that's a bit of good advice, though, is to make sure that they understand what it is, and maybe even march it back up the line and say, hey, listen, do you think we really need to have, does it really need to get to the senior executive service for approval? Could perhaps it not come down a little bit lower, and you have the confidence in your executive level that they may be able to approve and distribute content? Yeah. Because I think and this is, I suppose, the next part of the conversation is that we're really into this new world of, the factors of media production and distribution are now democratised. We don't buy ink in 44-gallon drums. We don't need fleets of trucks to deliver newspapers. We don't need transmission towers to be able to send video signal. So we all now have that ability to be able to create and distribute content. But the gap in, capability is a big one, because it's a very different thing to working and being effective in a newsroom environment as it is to developing a particularly more traditional government communications approach, which looks at advertising, campaigns, and it's got much more of that kind of focus to it. Where do you see then the challenges of that transition of government moving from the buying approach to the creation and distribution approach?
The challenges. Well, first of all, the opportunities I see are great.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are. Well, for example, there are a lot of journalists on the market where they're looking for jobs. So
that's a good point, isn't it? That it's a different. There's no lack of journalism graduates coming out of the universities and institutes of technologies.
That's right, but there are also a lot of experienced journalists, because the industrial changes. A lot of people have moved out of journalism into other comms roles, and also like you're saying, we don't need the print is not quite obsolete, but getting there. So we have endless space online. Obviously, it needs to be used wisely.
Do you think that's a risk? Do you think that's a risk, that the fact that there is unlimited space?
Yeah, it needs to be usused wisely.
Does that get you sloppy? Do you then think, we'll just put it up anyway, it doesn't matter?
Yeah, exactly right. And that is a risk, like you were saying. You need to be able to cut through the noise. Cut through the noise, reach your audience with stories that they find compelling.
When you're a journalist trying to sort of understand what interests a reader, how did you go about that? How did you sort of make judgments about, okay, well, this is going to actually light them up, or this is actually not, this isn't? Where was the evidence base that you moved for, to make those decisions?
You need to know your audience.
But how do you do that?
Yeah, so, there'd be market research, really, around who your audience is, what their values are, where they get their information from. There's the idea of, in communications, of building personas of your audience. Their, like I was saying, their values, their demographic, and that. So for example, I've worked at different publications. Each of them have a different kind of readership profile. whether it's working at the time at Australia's best-selling women's lifestyle magazine. We knew the women were into, beauty and fashion and that, but they really cared about social issues as well.
Okay. And where did those insights come from? Was it market research, or was it events where you were talking to people, or?
Well, it would have been both, but definitely market research, and also just from interaction with the readers. Like they would, write in, or you'd know over time what publications sold, depending on what you had on the cover. Some of them were much more popular than others, that kind of thing. And also then, working in newspapers in different cities, what your audience is. Like there's Like, for example, in the UK, I worked at The Independent, and they had a lot, their readership would have been a lot smaller than, say, The Sun. But you knew that stories that ran in The Sun wouldn't, the readership of The Independent wanted something quite different, and that would have been from, not just from market research, but from, well, I was saying interaction with the readers, but also over time, just building that knowledge. Yeah. Yeah. And, for example, working at the Canberra Times, that'd be quite a different readership to some other newspapers around the country.
Yeah, but again, it sort of goes back to that sort of absolute essential characteristic of curiosity, isn't it? You really absolutely have to be asking, listening, thinking, feeling, and gathering data, as they say, in this day and age. Feedback from sort of any sort of environment. What about for journalists? I was a journalist. Do you still feel like you're a journalist? I sort of always, I still sort of feel like I am. I'm just sort of in a different, I'm not speaking truth to, well, maybe I am sometimes, but I don't, it's a different role. Like I used to be, a political correspondent on a national political program for the ABC, AM and PM in the World Today. And the job was to get stuck in, to get into and ask the questions that people wanted to know, and to be, almost belligerent if they didn't, and, trying to force and demand. So it's a different sort of a role, but, I still get great satisfaction out of telling stories in a different way. So how do you find it now that you're no longer in journalism, Do you feel like you've sold out?
No, I don't feel like I've sold out. I think it's an interesting one, because people who work as journalists, not all people, but all the research shows, and our experience as well, I guess, shows that people who are actually working as journalists can be very protective of their role, and there's this particular mystique around journalism. Yeah. And then when you step outside it, you realise actually, it's a great job. I'm not knocking it. It's brilliant, and the practitioners are amazing. Yeah. But the mystique is a little bit self-serving.
Yes.
People can tell stories.
Anyone can do what they do.
Well, but the skills are really important, and the skills are what they have learnt. But a danger I see, and others have seen, is that the curiosity can wane. If people, like, there's this great American professor of journalism over at New York University called Jay Rosen, and he's been over to Australia a few times. And he said what really strikes him of Australian journalism is this insider kind of mentality. We even have a show called Insiders, which I love. I love insiders. But like there's insider mentality, like that they're in the know and the rest of us aren't. Yeah. But actually what is shown here and in other countries, similar countries, is that up at Parliament House, at the press gallery, not knocking it, but it can become like a bit of a bubble. And I don't think that's the bubble that the Prime Minister is talking about, but, just basically...
I think it's part of it.
It's
certainly part of it.
That it's almost like that, in the know, and that the
But the problem is that part of the problem, isn't it now, is that it's such a different world than what it was. I remember in my day and age, we would file twice a day. We'd be on a shift and we'd file either for AM and the World Today in the middle of the day. Then you'd go home, or you might come in and do the World Today and PM. You might do a night shift and knock up a story for the next morning. It's not like it is today, where they're, all singing, all dancing. It's almost like they're walking around with one of those,
the workload's
horns and, drums and bangs and cymbals. Yeah. You've got to do social, then you've got to do a bit of video, maybe edit this, huge. Get this up. Live, all of a sudden, 24-hour news, live, particularly in Canberra, they'll live cross and you've got nothing to say. Doesn't matter, up you go. There's not the time to be curious because
Yep.
you're so busy. There's not the time to go and have those conversations. There's not the time to go and build the trust.
Yep.
So how does that change things then? How does that dynamic, which has been driven by technology, change the discourse? And what opportunity is there for government in that evolving space to be more effective at the way they tell stories?
Well, ideally, there'd be the opportunity for the government communicators to go out and talk to people, like engagement opportunities, for example, to find out who, you know, the target audience, I guess, like what their concerns are and what their pain points are, that kind of thing. Like so much journalism is done now from behind the desk. Like, for example, in Indigenous affairs reporting here in Australia, there's like very little of it done outside the metropolitan cities, metropolitan areas. But yeah, like government communicators, hopefully they can get out from behind the desk sometimes and go out and meet the people and find the stories themselves. I don't know if there is that opportunity much.
It's sort of this evolving role to me. I think comms is changing. You know, this notion of there's a communications department is going to be superseded by the skills that particularly younger people have grown up with. I think by the time the younger generations arrive into the workforce, they're going to be, someone says, oh, well, no, that's the responsibility of the communications team. They'll be like, what are you talking about? I know how to operate that machine. I know how to write. I know how to create content. I know how to, so it's going to change, and I think it's going to become much more of a distributed function as opposed to there'll always be need for specialisation, but I also think it becomes more critically important because in that engagement, in that policy development side of things, you are going to need more listening skills. Like we're seeing it, design thinking, and this is all that research component of trying to understand who the audience is, which is that raw material really for the communications material. So I just think there's this very big change coming, and I think comms is as a role is going to become more strategic. Yes, there'll be the need for the actual content creation, the specialisation around video production, graphic design. Those skills are going to be needed there, but increasingly it's going to be a distributed function as opposed to the comms team will do that for you.
Right.
And I think that's the opportunity around engagement, is that the engagement people are getting the insights. Well, if you're getting the insights, well then, knock up some content, or take those insights and help to enrich the understanding that builds better policy or better regulation. So, yeah, I think it's quite a big change that's coming, and we're going to see it over time. And there's going to be a much bigger need for communication skills, and those journalism skills that you mentioned before. Again, I suppose that full circle of the interview. How do we get those skills into government? How do we train people to be curious? How do we train people to write better?
Well, train is the key, like training courses, really, and getting people to go out and find stories as part of that training.
Yeah, that's a good point as well, is because often, I think people feel put upon that they don't really, I don't have time to do training because I'm busy doing, 5 million things. Because, try and find somebody who doesn't tell you they're busy. It's impossible. Everyone's busy. Everyone's got things to do. But
well,
I think I think you're right. I think the leadership has to, if they know that they want to make this transformation, they're going to have to make the space and make the investment to give people the opportunity to acquire those skills.
Yeah, like from let's say APS level 3, 4, whatever, up, like step it up, in terms of like learn, like in. I was around before journalism degrees, right? They're still a fairly recent thing.
Yeah, they
People
are.
would do a different degree and then go and learn on the job.
Yeah.
Or would do some training, do some, vocational training or whatever, and then go and learn on the job.
Yeah.
So
That's what I did.
Be,
That's
yeah,
what I did.
same.
I had a marketing, a commerce degree.
Right, yeah.
And I was like, I want to be on the radio, and I'm just going to go and work in community radio.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I just,
learn on the job.
I did all of
It's the best way.
It was great.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Because if you've got half an idea, you can sort of watch the good people and go, oh, okay, right, I get that. And, I see that. And then looking for mentors as well. I had some great mentors in journalism. A guy by the great Paul Murphy, wonderful man. And, you'd write a lead. I remember when I started, it's a lead into the broadcast story that you'd put in. And, particularly when it started, it's rubbish, you put it, and he had that gentle, kind way of sitting with you and saying, can you see? And then you would learn, they would teach you. So I think that's another key thing, is that you've got to have guidance. You've got to
Yeah.
have mentorship. You've got to have people who can learn.
And the journalism schools are doing a really good job in that. But what I mean, like when we're talking about training in the APS,
Yeah.
if you give people, when they're starting out, the opportunities to explore this, to do some training on the job, to
Yep.
get mentorship, like you were saying, from their managers about how they're going or where they're going to find the stories, like how they're, constructing the stories and the content.
Yeah.
And that kind of mentorship is really important. And and let them do some training.
Yep. Fantastic. Well, Michelle, thank you so much. We are hard on time. We are up against, we do try to keep it to about the half an hour. Sometimes we go a little bit over, sometimes we go a little bit under, but certainly, thanks for the insights. And I think that's, it's the way of the world. These journalism skills are going to become the basis of those content marketing or content communication programs that are going to build into government agencies. And that is a capability that's going to have to be learnt, and it's going to have to be in those organisations, because that's what's going to be able to get it through. And as you say, cutting through in the world where, everyone's busy, everyone can choose what sort of content that they bring to themselves at what time, on the device of their choosing, in what format that they like it. There's no end to the difficulty and challenge and opportunity that this new world gives us. So thanks for coming to Content Group. You're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you.
You just, those really deep journalism skills, applied into this environment, they're just, they're the core skill. And I think that's what we got. Our mission at Content Group has really got to be to build this capability, not only just here in Australia, but around the world, so government can better explain itself. So this to me sits at the heart of what we're trying to do. Government's got to be able to explain why it is doing what it is doing, and if people don't like it, that's fine. There's a ballot box; they can vote them out at the end. But in the interim, public services have to support the elected governments of the day. They might not like what they're going to say, but that's bad luck. If you take a job, you've got to try to explain their story as best as you possibly can. And I think that's where there is so much opportunity for us, because, we have to rebuild trust. We have to get people to believe in democracy again and the institutions. So that's why we're doing this, GovComms, and that's why we come to work every day here at Content Group. So thank you so much to Michelle, and thank you to the audience for coming back once again. We'll be back at the same time in a couple of weeks. So thank you very much, and it's bye for now.
You've been listening to the GovComms podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes.